But first, ever since 1945, it's been the President of the United States who's been the leader of the free world. In every big crisis, whether it's a natural disaster like the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004, the global financial crisis of 2008, the invasion of Kuwait in 1990, or the so-called war on terror after 2001, it's been America that's expected the world to lead. The world's expected America to lead. And really only America that could lead, thanks to its economic weight, its military strength, and its goodwill and self-belief. Some countries have the goodwill, but no longer the strength to lead. Others have the strength, but certainly not the goodwill. America, by contrast, has been the indispensable nation, the nation we in the West rely on like no other. Yet the question remains, how much does the United States want to be the nation we need? It was only in 2014, in a sign that America was wearying of this task, that President Obama observed that America could no longer be the world's policeman on its own. It was a plea, really, for countries like Britain and Australia to step up and for the Europeans to do more. That these nations haven't really stepped up in any meaningful defence way says everything, as NATO's deficiencies in Europe and lack of military spending have shown. But even where others are prepared to help, on most issues it's the US that still has to do the leading. That's the undeniable reality. Only America has the weight, even if others like Australia might have the will. Which brings us, of course, to Ukraine, a democracy of more than 40 million people, currently under savage and unprovoked assault from a bigger, stronger neighbour, led by a man the world can now see is a brutal and unpredictable tyrant. Today's State of the Union address was always going to be a difficult one for President Joe Biden, with an unprecedented net 18% disapproval. How is he going to explain the humiliating scuttle from Afghanistan, the continuing COVID restrictions, and the highest US inflation in 40 years? On that last one, inflation, well, he barely gave it a mention today, for which he's been harshly criticised in the US media as we go to where. But more than trying to mop up bad polls, today's big speech demanded that Biden also explain how America could still be the leader of the free world when it's doing a lot for the people of Ukraine, but not actually fighting for them. Now, I'm not saying that anyone should lightly take on Russia, which remains a military superpower despite having an economy that's smaller than Italy's. And I realise that NATO moving in would likely trigger a much more deadly conflict. But did President Biden really so emphatically have to rule out today boots on the ground? With Putin threatening nuclear war, I think everything has to stay on the table, or you just telegraph your weaknesses. It was hard today to follow Biden's strategy on this point. I mean, much of his speech dished out what we might call tea and sympathy for Ukraine, but not a whole lot more. As he seemed at times to just go through the motions of reading someone else's words that had been written for him by his staff, perhaps on the order queue, I kept thinking, as the Kremlin watches this, how scared are they really? Today, in his State of the Union address, instead of announcing more weapons for Ukraine or perhaps threatening a no-fly zone for Russian military aircraft over Ukraine, if Putin makes this war worse, all Biden was prepared to commit to was more financial sanctions, including, as the president said, seizing the yachts and mansions of all the oligarchs. Which is all very well, but that's not going to stop the tanks rolling into Kyiv or the civilians getting killed trying to stand up to a madman, and not even the US president seems willing to tackle head on. America's NATO allies will have been somewhat reassured today that the speech did reaffirm America's military commitment to the Baltic states and to Poland. Still, the Ukrainians are fighting alone, with all the goodwill in the world from the global Western players and encouragement and help, to be sure, but it's hard to avoid the sick feeling in the stomach that they're doing on their own the job that all of us in the West should be doing, stopping a dictator in his tracks so that other dictators get the message that aggression does not pay. A sentiment shared by Ukraine's President Zelensky when he was asked this afternoon about Biden's speech.
What message? So many messages. I think that he has to give those messages what will really work. That is very important to be very, useful in this situation, in this war against Russia.
I think, first of all, he's a world leader, and it's very important for people in the United States to understand that despite the fact that the war is taking place in Ukraine, it's essentially for values in life, for democracy, for freedom. Therefore, this war is for all the world. And that message should be sent far and wide, from Ukraine to people in the United States, so they understand what it is like for us here, what we're fighting for, and why support for Ukraine matters.
It's not just their war, it's ours as well. And while the US president wants the world to be strong against dictators, his economic policy is still making the world weaker, with the usual emphasis in the speech on climate change and soak the rich tax increases. After his election, President Biden declared that America is back. And it's certainly back and present at all the international gatherings that his predecessor tended to shun. But other than turning up and again reading out the words of his advisors, how much of a difference will America make, and how much real leadership is Biden capable of? What these real and recent events show us is the US, the dominant power in the world, the leader of the West, it is who we have now, but how long will they be as strong? Surely we've got to reject complacency here in Australia, look to our own strengths and to our own military armed forces if we're to stay safe into the future. America might be our insurance policy, but we're not its 51st state. And it is beyond time we woke up to that reality as China grows ever stronger and more restless.